Welcome. Thank you for joining me. I'm Karen Tripp from the DIY Addict, and today we're going to do an in-depth dive into the flat back stitch. Now, before we step into this video, I do have another one that I did about 3 years ago. I developed this stitch about 6 years ago. If you want to see the original flat back stitch, you can go to my YouTube site, and it's under, you can actually search the flat back stitch, or you can go to my channel, which is the DIY Addict, all one word. And I have tons of other videos about English paper piecing. So if you want to catch the original, you can go back to that. But you can also just watch this and it'll probably have everything in it. So before we start, I also wanted to mention I do have a store, and we do carry all the things we're going to talk about today. It's at thediyaddict.com. And we have fabric, patterns, kits, everything a quilter could want. So you can check that out. That would be great. I did want to talk a little bit about a question I get all the time, and that is, when you use the flat back stitch, are the stitches really invisible on the front? And I have to say, they almost are. But there is two things to remember. I always keep my papers in as long as humanly possible. It does get heavy after a while and I will take them out, but those papers really stabilize everything and it helps it keep the shape. B, I don't take the larger quilt or the larger pieces that I've sewn together and drag them around, or travel with them. I do travel with little blocks. I do that all the time. They're very portable. But as the quilt gets bigger and you're attaching more of the blocks together, I try to move it as little as possible without going nuts. I mean, certainly, moving it from room to room. But I am very careful about disrupting the stitches. So leave your papers in as long as you can. And as you're stitching the blocks together, try to keep it intact and not move it as much as possible. And I think that helps with the stability. All right, now just let me show you a finished quilt that has been quilted, laundered, loved, and you can see that the stitches don't show. Hey there, I just wanted to show you my quilt that I got back from market. People are always asking me about the flat back stitch and can you see the stitches on the front after you've taken the papers out? And the answer is, well, you tell me. No, not really. You can't. Look at that. So the flat back stitch is great for, let's get a close-up. Great for curves, and if you're tired of looking at those stitches on the front, try it out. Thanks. At the end of this tutorial, I will talk about other frequently asked questions. What kind of thread do I use? What kind of needles do I use? How did I come up with the flat back stitch? And I'll save that all for the end. All right, let's talk about technique. There are 4 ways to anchor your papers, and I'll explain what that means. But the flat back stitch itself is the same in all 4 methods, okay? Now, there is tape to hold the front. You could also use Clover Clips. You could also use sew tights. And the 4th one is when you actually don't have anything and you're just flying blind, you just have papers and a needle and you don't have anything to secure that. There's a way to make that work. And so let's get into technique. And before we do, I'm just going to do a quick little primer on glue basting, because I think that's really key to anything. Before you start, the key to success is making sure you are gluing the pieces correctly. If you are thread basting, just skip ahead to the next part. I like to use 3/8 seam allowance. It gives me a little more room to glue and stay off the edge, and it gives me more room for fussy cutting and positioning my papers. You can see I'm staying off the edge of the white paper because that's where I'm going to be sewing later.
So you can see that little space there. I don't want any glue there because then I can't get my needle through. When you're folding the fabric over the paper, you want to make sure it's snug to the edge and watch your corners. I purposely didn't do it properly, and you can see I have sort of a high side. This is where a lot of problems begin. When your papers aren't fitting together, it's most likely because you haven't glued accurately. Let me show you how to fix that. All you have to do is just peel back the edge or the side and just add more glue and reposition it. It's really easy. And you can see it's all fixed now. Nice and straight. Let's talk about setting our papers and getting them ready to stitch. This is using tape. I just use regular painter's blue tape. It doesn't leave any adhesive on the fabric, and it has a lot of stick to it. And I find when I first started that that's what I used and it worked just fine. So take a piece of tape on the right side of the fabric and put it across. And that's going to go right where you want to sew. You're going to sew with the tape side flat, but flip it over, and this is where we're going to start sewing. I've already put in some setting stitches and I knotted and I already started, and I just want to come down, and I'm taking just 2 or 3 threads on each side. Never one, because that'll just snag the fabric, and anything more than 3, it kind of clumps up. Now what I'm going to do next, I'm going to sew a few more, and then I'm going to flip the whole thing because I like to sew up because gravity keeps the thread down and you have a tendency to catch things less if you're going up. So I usually start and I'm kind of sewing down, and then once I get secure and I feel like the pieces are holding tight, then I'll flip and I'll start sewing in the upward position. And I'm constantly holding the papers with my fingers, my index and middle finger. The tape is also holding it, but I'm really supporting it with my fingers from the back. And that's why I call this the flat back stitch. I do get asked how many stitches per inch do I sew, and that's anywhere between 16 and 18 maybe. And I figure you are replacing the straight stitch from a sewing machine, so I'm trying to replicate that, and that's how I determined how many stitches. This is one of those things that is a personal preference, and you'll decide. Now I'm coming to the end, and what I will do is make a little lingerie knot, do a couple of those to set the corners. I do try to do that at every corner so that if I do make a mistake, God forbid, and I have to take everything out, I just have to do, maybe I just have to replace a side and it's all knotted so I don't have to restitch everything. And it gives it a lot more support at the corners because that's the most vulnerable point where things come apart. So I've got that done. We've got one side, and now let's work on another piece. All right, we'll flip this over and then we'll take the tape off, and then you can have a look. You really don't see the stitches on the front, and I'm using white thread, so that's pretty good. But it's in there really snug. But you can see the stitches from the back, and it looks really good. And then we'll have a look on the front. Looks good. And so now we're ready to use the other pieces. So let's go ahead and add another one. We do it the same way. Just get it in there, line it up. And you can always wiggle it around before you start. So the tape is really, doesn't have to be perfect, but try the best you can. And you can still wiggle it around after that. And always check, because things move, even if you tape it. So I've got that tape using the blue painter's tape again. And now I'll flip it over. And that's my little blue thimble everyone asked me about. It's a silicone finger cut, and it just helps me grab the needle. So I'm going to go ahead and stitch up like I did before in the same manner. And I do like to make sure that my thread is moving on the needle on the eye, so it's not in the same place all the time, because it does create a little wear mark. So periodically I may stop and just slide it along ever so slightly, and that'll help, because we do tend to pull our thread and pull the papers tight. That is something else I did want to mention. I do snug up my stitches. I don't pull them so tight that I'm breaking my thread, but I do like them snug. And if you watch closely, you'll see I'm actually just whip stitching, but just on the back. So it's just a little whip stitch, grabbing the threads. Now, as I'm coming to the end here, I will mention one of the drawbacks with the tape is that it kind of loses its portability. I always keep paper pieces, everything glue basted in little baggies. I have them in my purse, I have them in my car, I have them everywhere so that, I can stitch at the drop of a hat. But when everything's taped, it gets moved around and it gets kind of too big, and then you got to have the tape with you. So I actually don't use tape anymore. But as I say with all EPP, there's so many different ways to do this. You just really need to find what works for you. All right, so we're done with that guy. And you can see it looks pretty good and consistent. And I would just do the same thing on the other side. But I'm going to take my tape off, and that way you can see it from the front. Again, I would just tape or keep the tape on if I were to sew that side. And there it is, just the way I wanted it. Now let's go on to the next step where I use Clover Clips. You'll need 2 Clover Clips, but I always carry a few extra just in case I lose them. But you can also do it with just 1. So that's how it's going to look. I take them off, and now I'm going to set my papers and line them up how I want them to stitch. And then I'll put 1 Clover clip at the end of that seam that I'm going to be stitching. And then I'm going to turn it around, and this is where I'm going to start. So I'm going to come in through the seam, so I'm burying my tail of the thread so I don't have to mess with that later. And I go through both pieces, and then I'm going to make a knot. I'm going to do a couple lingerie knots to secure that corner. And you can do a knicker knot or a quilter's knot, whatever knot you want. I like to just use a little lingerie knot. They seem to be easier for me. And so I'm going to secure that corner. And then I'm still really holding the papers from the back with my fingers as I start. And the Clover clip is holding on the one end. All right, so now I'm ready to stitch, but you can see the fingers. That's the support. And now I'm ready to start stitching. So I'll make a couple stitches. Again, this is just a whip stitch. I'm going to just try to take maybe 2 or 3 threads from each side. And then I will flip it over. But first, let me just get that. I think you'll see when you stitch up, you don't catch on things as much. So give it a try. Yeah, see, there I am. It's just, Anyways, let me take one more just to get the secure before I turn it around. Yeah, see, it's driving me nuts that I'm catching on everything. That's okay. It happens. All right, so I'm just making sure they're still lined up. I constantly check. Now you can see through the clover clip because it is clear. I mean, it may be tinted, but you can still see. And I can see that my corner is lined up still, but you could take the clover clip off and you could reposition it or double check and put it back on. It's not a problem. So I'm going to go ahead and stitch up. Again, small stitches going up. I like this method more than the tape because I have bags everywhere in my car, my purse, at work. And I like to keep it simple. I'm not always sewing at home where I can grab things. Now, as I got to the top, I was able to take the clover clip off. And as soon as you feel like you've got the pieces secure and they're lining up, feel free to take that clover clip off. And you can take it off at any point that you feel things are working for you. All right. So I'm at the corner and I'm doing my little lingerie knots. And we'll go ahead and add another piece after this, and I'll show you how I continue. So I don't like to carry tape with me, which is why I switched to clover clips, and I just think it's easier. So I'm going to take a third piece, and I'm going to use 2 clover clips this time. I'm going to put one on this side and one on the other side, and I could stitch either way, either space, but I'll take this one, and I've already knotted the corner, so then I can just start stitching all the way up. Now you can see my one orange clover clip is starting to wiggle loose on the right, and I actually really don't need that one. That was just kind of helping me set the one piece into the 2 pieces, and so I actually don't need it. I could reclip it, but I'm just going to take it off because it'll just get in the way. So I really just need the one where I'm sewing on that seam. So I don't need 2. I just use 2 in the beginning to set things. But you can see my fingers are still, again, adding support because I like to keep that flat. That's the whole key to the flat back stitch, is having your pieces flat, so that you can get through the fabric and you're just skimming over the papers. You're not sewing into the papers, you're really just over the top. All right. And I won't bore you with the details, but you can see you just keep going. And you would do the same with the next piece or the next seam. Just put one clover clip in and just stitch that right up. I like the clover clips because they're easy, small, and portable. And that is how you use the clover clips. And now I'd like to show you the third method, which is using sew tights. These are magnetic and they can be tricky, but once you learn how to work them, they are extremely helpful. So what you want to do is set your pieces with these. You've got to pull the sew tights apart, and you take the part that has the little hash marks on it, and you have that grab the fabric side, and then you line up your pieces, and then you set the magnet on top. And so you're basically sandwiching in the EPP. Oh, I have a little paper that's come apart, so I'll add a little glue. Sorry. And so, and it also works as a needle minder, by the way, which is a nice little added feature. So they're really nifty little things. Anyway, so I've got the 2 pieces set and lined up, ready to stitch how I want them. And I basically do the same thing that I have on the other methods. I come through the seam, so I'm not messing with that tail anymore. And I'm going to set the corner. And I'm going to use a couple lingerie knots. And I do like to try to hide my thread ends, because when you come back around to stitch, it's so much easier not to have them in the way. And you can see I sometimes catch things, but that's how it goes. All right. So it really is just the same method of stitching. It's just really more about setting the pieces and holding the pieces. And that's what these 4 methods do. So there are 4 ways to hold your pieces together. And so now I'm just going to get a little more secure and take 2 or 3, 4 stitches just to set it. And then just finish stitching your seam. And you can take the sew tight off when you feel like you're ready to do that and you're coming to the corner. But what I think is really helpful with sew tights is this next piece. This is sewing with curves, which the flat back stitch happens to be really brilliant at. But I also love using sew tights when the pieces get bigger, when the blocks get bigger and they get unruly. This is when I think the sew tights really shine, because now I've got 2 big blocks put together and I can use sew tights all over, and it's really holding things snugly. So now I'm going to work a little bit on a piece that has curves, because I don't want you to be afraid of that. And the flat back stitch is perfect. So you're putting your pieces together like you would a puzzle, and then you're just, again, stitching the same way. So I'm coming in through the seam, I'm grabbing the corner, I'll set that corner, and then I'll continue to stitch on. So really, it is no different than sewing the straight lines that you have on the other methods. And this is just the curve. You set it up the same way, and I will just keep stitching. I won't do that now, but it's really that easy. And now let me show you the sew tights as they're holding the pieces together, and I'm just going to wiggle it. You see how they're really holding everything together? They're pretty awesome. And now let me just show you a little curved piece in case you didn't quite get it as a solo. Again, I would set it up where I would use the Clover Clips. I'll get that lined up, clip that, and then just flip it around. And again, I'm going to set my corner. I'll come in through the seam, and I'll make my setting stitches. Again, a couple lingerie knots. And there are so many great patterns with curves, and I think the flat back stitch is really the best way to handle curves. Now, what I could do with this, I could use the Clover Clips. You know, I could also use tape on the front. So if you're a beginner and you're trying to learn the flat back stitch, you know, you could use all the methods. But, you know, you could use tape and Clover Clips until you felt a little more comfortable with the stitch. So, you know, certainly give that a try as well. You can't have too much security, let's put it that way, and stability. And then I'll just take a couple more stitches down, and you'll see I would just finish this up like I would anything else. So I won't continue on too much. And now let me show you the 4th method. And that is when you don't have tape, Clover Clips, or anything, and you just have your pieces and some thread. So what I would do, I would set the corner. And again, I don't have anything holding these together except for my fingers in the back. But I would just, you know, they're kind of dangling, but that's okay. I would align the corners, put the setting stitches in, and then stitch up, but I've still got my fingers supporting in the back, so I can do that. Like I said, it's a little floppy, but it absolutely can be done. So if you don't have anything, don't let that stop you from stitching. You just have to go a little slower. And again, just keep supporting that back and you'll be fine. You can see I'm going to come to the top and everything's lining up. So it went pretty fast. And it's easy, obviously, with smaller pieces. As you get bigger, I think that would get a little harder if you didn't have anything. So yeah, there we go. You know, I'm nearing the top and I didn't use anything. So I'll show you what it looks like in a second. Let me just get this one. Yeah, looks pretty good. There it is. And there's the back. And I'll show you a close-up. And now just let me quickly talk about needles and thread that I use, if you don't mind.
I use a Richard Hemming number 11 milliners. It has a slight bend to it after use, which I love because it kind of fits me. I never break these. They're very smooth. I love them. I also am a convert to Wonderfill Invisafill. It's 100 weight. My motto is I don't even wear jewelry. I'm a chef by day and a quilter by night. But I'll get a few minutes during the day at work to EPP in between certain things, or maybe I'm at a doctor's appointment. So I try to go as lean as possible when getting supplies. I am not at home with all of the things that I need that I can just grab. So I am more portable, which is why I love EPP. So I have reduced my system down as minimal as possible. But I use this thread. It's 100 weight cottonized. What does that mean? They put it through a process, and what it does is it takes the shine off and it takes the stretch out, which you can find with very thin poly. So it takes all that out, but it's also very durable. So I have fallen in love with this. It just melts into the fabric. You can't even see it. But I have a tendency to use 3 colors. That's it. I don't color match. I don't do any of that. Unless I'm working on white. If I'm just working on all white, I will use a white thread or black, very dark. Anyways, I use sort of a medium tone. But what I wanted to show you is my setup for on the go. I always have this in my purse. And it's my reading glasses because I can't see. I have my little needle book that I keep a couple straight pins, but all of my needles. And then I have 3 threads, 3 colors. My light, medium, and dark. And I will put in a dark if I think I'm working on more darker colors, but I usually am not. So I usually just travel with those 3. And I have my needle threader, again, because I can't see. Although I will say this Wonderfill, this Invisafill, very easy to thread. But it also has a little cutter, so I don't need my scissors, so I use that. I also carry a glue pen, just in case some of the pieces are wiggling out and I need to glue. And then, of course, I'm always going to run out, so I need a backup, a refill. And then I keep Clover Clips, and that's how I'm sewing now for my EPP. And then I use my little thimbles. But everything I need stays in here. I keep this in my purse. But what I also do is I make up blocks, and I put them in little baggies. And before I put them in the bag, I'm going to lay them out how I believe they are supposed to be. I intend for them to be. I take a photo. It's on my phone, because I don't tape these. I just leave them in the baggies. And then when I'm going to sew, I can reference my phone, the photo on the phone, to see exact placement, because sometimes I look at them and I think, oh no, how is that supposed to go? But otherwise, I have baggies in my car. I have baggies at work. I have baggies in my glove compartment, but they're all by block. Everything's already glued up. I don't carry scissors. And again, this is my to-go system.
Well, I think I'll stop there with the class today. Thank you for watching. I hope you learned something. If you have any questions, you can get those to me and I'll answer. And thank you so much. Enjoy. Bye-bye.